All right, guys, here we are at the very beginning of the series. Going to be removing the engine from this 2007 Cayman S. It is my 987.1, and I'm going to be rebuilding the engine. So I'm going to try to make a little DIY tutorial for you guys to follow along. I already did this on a 2003 Boxster. If you want to check out the the Broken Boxster battle, if you want to check out that series, you can check out this playlist up here. Over 30 episodes on very detailed removal and reinstallation of the engine. For this one, I'm going to follow along my own video, and I'm just going to document any differences in it instead of doing the whole thing all over again, because as you can imagine, it was a ton of work. Step 1, remove the wheels. Step 2 and 3, remove the covers so we can see the engine. Look, we're practically done. Next up, going to disconnect the battery. All right, once again, I'm trying to follow the manual for a 2007 Cayman, and number 8 here says to remove the throttle body with distributor pipe, but do not disassemble. So this is the throttle body, and the distributor pipe is, well, I have the Ultimate AOS, but normally it connects over here and connects over here and then connects to your AOS. So I don't know why you would want to do that. I'm pretty sure that the throttle body does not need to be disconnected from the engine. I think I can just undo this right here with this rubber hose and disconnect it, and then that part will stay with the car and the rest will drop down. All right, then it says to unclip the shift cables. So I know that this one is clipped in. Aha, so this one is clipped into the throttle body. So that makes sense. That is why they say to remove the throttle body. All right, I made the mistake of removing the wheels before removing these bolts that the lift always interferes with. So I always remind myself, remove these first before lifting the car. But in the meantime, I went ahead and removed that plastic panel along this side, the plastic panel along this side. Now I'll take off the middle one. All right, lowered it so I could remove the bolts on each side while it's down here. Went ahead and used the 24mm, loosen that up, remove the belt. Next up is removing the power steering fluid reservoir. I took the cap off already. I've got a syringe and a tube, so I'm gonna try to suck out as much as I can. All right, I got a decent little amount out. All right, there is no chance of reaching down to that part that you need the ring to disconnect the power steering fluid reservoir without taking this tube out. So I went ahead and removed that, and I got to remember to buy new rubber sleeves here to put those back on. Disconnecting the B+ terminal, it's a 13mm. All right, over here, that's my scavenging air fan down there. It has a little electrical connection I have to disconnect. And there it's off, just have to pull up on that little tab on the left and push it down. That was this step. The next step says to open the cap on the coolant expansion tank. Interesting, but okay. All right, that mass airflow sensor wire right here is supposed to unclip. Yeah, but it is zip tied on. Great. Oh, actually, it wasn't zip tied, that's actually the clip. So that's what the clip looks like. It's attached. You just pull it straight out. All right, it didn't specifically say to disconnect the mass airflow sensor, but since we're unclipping it, I assume we also want to disconnect it. All right, for the Cayman, just pulled this back, and you can see that is where the wiring harness comes in, and it goes to our little electronic module here. So I just used some paint markers and marked the top one white, then pink, then red, then gold there at the bottom for these four, so I can remember how to get them back in easily. All right, I was able to get these disconnected without taking this rail off, but these two wires go up to a grounding screw up here, and so you really need to take this off first just to make it a lot easier on yourself. It looks like there are a couple Torx bolts here and probably somewhere else. All right, surprisingly, this thing is just snaps in with these clips all the way down here. They snap in all throughout here. So while these are torque screws that you can remove, you don't need to remove those. Leave those there. And then I'm gonna guess this stuff is just kind of felt like it was just glued on a little bit, maybe. Let's see. No. No. All right, well, you can lift that up out of the way now. You got a lot of more excess. All right, I removed the first two because the first two go to the wiring harness. Left the other one on. All right, I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but I just pulled really hard and untucked this from over there because there are two more connectors under here. Let's see, this one is connected to the wiring harness and it splits off into two, so you have to unplug these two connectors, white and black, so it'll be easy to remember where to go back. All right, that was not easy. I used a screwdriver on one side and that tool on the other side. I'll show you here to get this first one out. Because you have to pinch these things in this side so that they open and detach, and then these wires are super thick. So essentially with my left hand I held the screwdriver against this and held onto the wires. With my right hand I pinched in the other side with another tool and just wiggled it back and forth until it finally came off. So it was a huge pain. Then the other one came off a lot easier after you have better access to it. Just use a screwdriver on the left, my thumb on the right, and I could wiggle that one off. All right, now that it's all disconnected, you can push this grommet into the hole and push the whole wiring harness through as we lower the engine later. All right, pushed it in, realized it is clipped on right here. Assume this will just pull out. All right, let's find out. All right, yep, it was just stuck through onto that stud. All right, it is now day 2 for me, so I think I have everything from the back disconnected, at least at this stage, and the next thing on the checklist is to raise the car, start taking stuff off of the bottom. So the first steps we have here are removing all the underbody covers, and then we're gonna remove these plastic support clips for the coolant hoses. We got it up, we got all the panels off, and look at this. So, for those of you following along my Boxster content, you will recognize this plastic front console with the quick connects. So I converted that on my other one. All right, so these are just the plastic support pieces that it's talking about. And actually, both look like they are broken. I think they're supposed to connect over there. So I did order an extra one last time because I figured one would break and it did not, so I've got a spare. I lowered the car some so there wouldn't be as much distance to drain this, and all we're gonna do is pull this quick disconnect thing, sticking a screwdriver in here. All right, next I disconnected the one on the other side, the main one, and we got it all drained out, mostly. Next is to disconnect this hose clamp and pull that one off, and then the leftmost one of these, because that connects up here. You don't need to disconnect this because that connects to this piece that's going to stay on the car after it's disconnected from there. My car is a manual, but if you guys have a Tiptronic, take note that you need to disconnect one more coolant hose from the oil water heat exchanger for the transmission and loosen the spring band clamps and pull off the hoses. Next, I'm gonna remove those big braces down here. We already took C out. That's the one that's near the jack point. This thing says that C is an M10 by 45 and the other ones are M10. So I don't know, maybe that one is different. All right, we got those pulled off, and I remembered this is the one that is by the jack point, and the other ones are nuts. Oh, in case you're wondering about this red piece, it's a little insert that slides in there and gets held in with 2 of the nuts and the studs. It's sold by Renline. It's a tie down, so if you are trailering your car to the track like I am, great place to loop in here on the back of your car and tie it down, and there's a set on the front as well. Next step, remove these 2 nuts and the 2 bolts so you can take the plate off. All right, at the back of the car, the next step is to remove this V-brace here. It just has 1 bolt on each side. Next, removing the sway bar, removing the 2 bolts from here, the 2 bolts from here, and then we take this off the end link here. I just used a 16 millimeter kind of breaker bar to get that loose first. And then I took a 16 millimeter wrench, put it over here, and then you have to take a T30 Torx and hold the end of the stud that you're unscrewing it from, and remove those. Next, we're going to remove this safety cable. It is a 13 millimeter nut on the front, and you can hold it in the back. With a 12 millimeter, you want to make sure you do counter hold it because you don't want to twist this cable. I just pulled these ends out, saved the nut on them. Now there are oxygen sensors mounted on the top part. So you're going to disconnect the oxygen sensor and pull the clip out of here. So after you unplug that part, you can see that this is just slid into the bracket from the side. So you just slide it out this way, and that's going to leave the bracket alone up there. And then just do the same thing with the oxygen sensor on the other side. The only difference on mine is on my passenger's side, it disconnects from the bottom instead of the top. This part should still slide out. All right, now that we have this stuff disconnected from the bracket, it just has 4 bolts, 2 on each side. So 1 up there, 1 right here. Remove those and remove this cross beam. All right, these are 15 millimeter bolts, and the top one on my driver's side is also being used to hold that bracket into place. So this thing is what's connected to the other side of that bracket from the other side. It's connected down here. And I think the manual says that this is a headlight adjustment cable somehow. I don't understand the mechanics of this, but you squeeze on the top and the bottom of this plug on the right and pull that off. All right, it's really hard to remove this if you already take that bolt off. So do this before you take the bolt off, because it's if this was being held steady, it would be a lot easier. Just for reinstall, I'm noting that this cable goes all the way up here behind my air intake there. All right, so that was that step. Now we're going to remove the rear silencer. I have the full sole exhaust, so I will be disconnecting my headers here and removing this rear part. All right, detaching here, they each have 2 nuts on top and a plate up there. Looks like that when they're separated. 2 more 13 millimeters in the back, and 1 here on the very bottom that are attached to the mounting bracket. All right, these interfere with the transmission, so I do have to remove them from here as well with 2 bolts. All right, releasing the 3 right around the rod, and let us slide the rod out through there. This tip used to be flush with this, and it's gonna give us just enough room to get through. Accomplished. All right, next, down here on the right side of the car, we have a grounding strap. It's a 13 millimeter. Just have to remove this nut and pull the grounding strap off of the stud. Okay, the next step is we are going to loosen the drive shaft here from where it makes contact with the transmission. So it's just a bunch of hex bolts, and they are 8 millimeter. But right before I do that, my boots have a leak in here. You can see right there where the grease kind of sprays out, and I don't have my wheel on here, but it's spraying all around the inside of my wheel. So while all of this is out, I am going to remove this entire piece and have it serviced. To get it out, I know that there is this 32 millimeter nut on here. So I have a gigantic 32 millimeter socket, and I'm going to loosen this first before I disconnect it from the other side. Don't know that I have to, and I should have done this with the wheel on and still on the ground. I'm gonna see if I can't at least loosen it from here with the wheel off. All right, on the left side of the car, you've got your oil pump on this side, and it has this vacuum line. It is corrugated, and you're supposed to remove it from here by pulling it off. Okay, feels like one of those normal connectors where you squeeze it on the sides and pull it off. So that's this step right here. Number 2 is that hose, and connected on the top of it is a small vacuum line that you're supposed to just pull off and disconnect. It's harder to see in the car, so I just wanted to show you that picture. You'll see it, or you'll feel it at least when you get in there. And then near the same location, the oxygen sensors on the left and right side are attached to this clip against the firewall. So we need to disconnect them and pull them off so they're not on this clip anymore. Now we are levering off the shift and selector cables and disconnecting them from the bracket. So that has a nut holding it on, and right here it's the ball. So I'm just gonna use a screwdriver, get behind there and pop this out. And then there's one on the other side because I have a 6-speed. If you have a 5-speed, they're both on the same side, and yours might look different because I have the numeric shifter, which is amazing, by the way. All right, I was just able to use a big screwdriver and pop that off, and I got really lucky because this nut up here on mine is bigger than 24 millimeters, and didn't know what I was gonna do. I found this tool that I used to get the front fan off of a BMW, and it was skinny enough and just the right size. Oh, hallelujah. I found this wrench. Apparently it is a 30 millimeter. I thought it was gonna be a 28, but this is what comes with your numeric cables when you buy them. So thank God, yes, it's nice and short, and be able to use this to get those nuts off. So there are a bunch of lines that we need to disconnect. I believe these are power steering fluid lines. So these are going to be disconnected from here. You can see that they run up to these. So these are gonna come down with the car. So we have to disconnect them from there. These are the fuel lines. So we're gonna disconnect those. So this tube is the brake booster that we disconnected. The instructions don't say it, but I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect it from here and just remove this piece, because while this is disconnected from this side, I just feel like it's gonna be in the way and possibly break it if I just leave it there. And then the blue line, if we follow it over here, it comes up to that connector right there. So I'm going to disconnect it from there. Fuel lines disconnected, these guys disconnected, take that little pipe off. Came up to start, removing this one, pulled it out from that little white plastic clip, and of course that little plastic clip broke. So I don't know if I can replace that. If so, I will. Otherwise, I can still use a zip tie up here on it to hold it in place when I reinstall. So this little plastic clip was right tucked into there, and this is actually the plastic clip from up here that has the same one. They are very brittle. Here is the first one, so it snapped when I removed it, so I need to buy another one of these. The instructions did say plug. I didn't believe them. I was just gonna let it drain, but this thing kept draining forever. So make sure you have like a little plug like that to shove in the end, or it's just gonna keep draining and draining. Side note, I went ahead and removed the headers on both sides now. I can do it later, but it's just as easy now. This one on the driver's side sticks down lower than this. So when I set this on the table, I would have to worry about that. So just not have to worry about them, took them off. All right, one of the final steps is to remove the AC compressor here. So it's got two E10 bolts, one there, one there. Gonna remove those, and then there's one more in the back that you have to get through from here. So we're gonna remove those. Then we're gonna, after we lower the engine a little bit, it's gonna have the clearance to pull it out, and we're gonna set it back in here so that we don't have to disconnect the lines. All right, I got that bolt off and the one over here, and you can see that there's a little metal bracket that those two bolts were holding in, so that bracket is now loose. So I'm gonna have to remember to put that back on. For posterity, this is the longer of the three bolts. So I got it out. So essentially right through here, that big block right here is in the way. You have to kind of push under it and push out of the way to get to it. So I was at an angle kind of like this. To get into it, the easiest way to see that bolt is to look through here. If you look through the side over here, you can see where the bolt was. The head of it was right here where the arrow is, and it goes all the way through in there. So yeah, that's the tough one. Oh, and then these lines that are going to it, you have to unsnap them from back here. They're just clipped in. Now for the fun part, got the table underneath it. Got the front edge kind of lined up with the front of the block here. I learned last time, you need to have a lot of this weight forward because we're going to remove the transmission eventually. And so you can't have all the weight over the edge of the table or your engine will fall over. So we're going to try to kind of balance it like this. Essentially the split of the transmission is almost directly in the middle of the table. Now I'm going to lower it so that some weight is on the table. And I want to point out that the width of the table is just narrow enough to avoid the part that your transmission mounts are attached to. All right, I have some of the weight on the table now, so go ahead and take off the transmission mounts. So this guy, and these are not the stock ones, of course, that is the Renline one. All right, it's almost touching the table. I just raised it back up a little bit. I didn't do this with the Boxster, but I see that this, when I set it on the table, the transmission wasn't touching it, but the engine was. So I'm gonna take one of my little 1-inch blocks. I'm gonna place it under here just so that the transmission has something to rest on when the engine hits. Yeah, I like that. Now, this oil filler thing was touching the other way because without the transmission touching the ground or touching the table, it was bending backwards. So I think this is better. All three bolts from the right side were the same length. This one, the bottom left one, I noticed is shorter than the other ones. All right, actually two of them, the bottom two are shorter. This is the top one. Got all the mounts removed. I zip tied both of the axles up out of the way. Now I'm going to lift the car just a little bit so I can get that AC compressor out. Okay, I just removed these two small E10s and they were holding on this B+ terminal. The reason for that is that the pipes from the AC compressor have to come out this way and they have to go over the thing that this is mounted on. So I figured if I disconnect this, I can push it back out of the way and it gives me a lot more clearance. All right, again, like the Boxster, it doesn't say anything about that, but these two fuel lines that you disconnect need to come on the inside of this emergency brake cable. So I have to flex them up there and tuck them inside of that so they don't get hooked on that cable when the engine comes down. All right, one thing we forgot to do was to disconnect this. Pop this connector off. That was starting to stretch. Got up in the car and fed the wiring harness through, so that's there now. This cable for the Ultimate AOS got hooked over here, so it was starting to stretch, so luckily I saw that. That's why I climbed up here. But everything else down here looks like it is clearing, and I think we're home free. All right, we still have one more thing connected. I never saw instructions about this, but we obviously need to disconnect that from here with the little hose clamp. All right, guys, well, it is out now. Similar to the Boxster video, I just slowly raised the car up, kept checking around, making sure things were not getting caught and snagged, freeing them up, and voila, here we go. We have a 3.4 liter engine. If you have watched this to the end, I'm sure it has been either very helpful or entertaining, so please give it a thumbs up. And in the next video on this, I am going to start taking everything apart. So I just want to go around and show what it looks like at the moment so that you, or specifically I, can come back and check this out and see how things were when it was all together, so that I can get it back to this state before putting it back in the car. So we're gonna strip it all down. I am going to send the block off, have it bored out to a 3.8, and then I'm going to, the plan right now is to rebuild it all myself. So wish me luck, and I'll see you guys on the next video.